Nice.
Hey everybody. Thanks for coming out today. Your attendance and book purchases let us have events like this, and we really love them, so we appreciate you. This evening we have the pleasure of hearing from Karen Booth for the launch of her latest romantic comedy, Swap and Smell the Roses, with Reese Ryan. Karen Booth is a Midwestern girl transplanted to the South, raised on 80s music and way too many readings of Forever by Judy Blume. Married to her real-life Jake Ryan, she has two amazing kids with epic hair, a very bratty cat, and she loves getting up before dawn to write romance, with plenty of sparks. Vivian Award-winning author Reese Ryan writes sexy, emotional, grown folks romantic fiction set in small southern towns. She is an advocate for the romance genre and diversity in fiction. Reese is the host of Story Behind the Story, an interactive YouTube show where readers and authors connect. All right, thank you for attending. And if you didn't already get a copy of Swap and Smell the Roses, you can grab one up at the front, or Reese's book must read. Yes, as well. Thank you.
So first of all, Karen, congratulations on the release of your 30th Harlequin book. And your 44th title overall. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about the premise of Swap and Smell the Roses.
Okay, can people hear me? Because I'm not used to doing this. I think I was telling Leah earlier today when she came in to have me sign her book that originally I was inspired by Taylor Swift. This was like 3 years ago, and her ability or willingness to be very brutal with her lyrics about the love situations that she's been in or whatever. And so I liked the idea of writing a heroine who is a singer-songwriter who used her music as an avenue to kind of vent about love, philosophize about love, basically to reflect her romantic relationships in her music. So that's kind of where it started. But by the time the book got written, or when it came time to write the book, it didn't really work for me to write her as someone famous. And actually, I kind of like the idea of exploring what it's like to be really talented and then not, things aren't coming together.
Ooh, yes.
Yes, Reese and I have both been there. So, that was the genesis of it. But it all came from Willow, and then it also came from the idea of, so there's a companion book to this book, and the two stories happen simultaneously, and they're just about two college best friends 12 years later who switch living situations for 2 months. And so you get the city-country thing, the country girl in the city and the city girl in the country. So that was it.
I love it. All right, so most of your books are set in larger cities, like New York and Chicago. And this one is set in a small fictional town in Connecticut. Right. So how did this different setting affect the vibe of the book overall?
It's funny. So I thought about this a lot because you and I both wrote for Desire for a long time. And all those books, the heroes had to be wealthy, powerful, influential people. So a lot of them ended up being set in New York or Miami, Chicago, LA, whatever. And I always kind of liked that because I grew up in a small town. I live in a smallish town. And I love going to like New York or Miami or wherever. I love like all of the excitement. But this book is all about healing. I mean, beyond the romance, it's about healing and slowing down to kind of figure out where your life is going. And so that just didn't work with a big city. I really like it's kind of a cliche that people say, oh, I like small town stories because of the quirky characters and all that kind of stuff. but it's true. It's like there has to be a bakery, there has to be a farmer's market, there needs to be all these things, you know, they have to be there. So, and it's fun to write those things because those are real people. They're not, you know, you have to create three-dimensional people. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it.
I can definitely appreciate wanting to step outside that box of always like the billionaires and super rich guys and being able to write people who feel more real. And that's one of the things I like to now.
Right, no, absolutely. I mean, you've done that with the, what is the name of the beach series for Grand Central?
Oh,
your books.
The Holly Grove Island series is all about real people.
Yeah.
So yes, I love that.
And then Reese and I worked together with another Harlequin author, Joss Wood, on a series called Moonlight Ridge, which is, what is it called?
Yes.
Okay.
I had to think about it.
I know. I was like, too many books.
It was the Moonlight Ridge
trilogy. Right. And it was set in North Carolina in the mountains, and that's also like a small town thing.
Asheville.
Yeah. So, it's fun. It's fun. Very fun.
So Willow is this frustrated musician, and her frustration as a musician and her songwriting, expressing herself through songwriting, is a big part of the story. Mm-hmm. So how much did your background play into that?
A lot. So, you know, I worked in music for 10 years. My husband worked in music. My friend Lane over there worked. And, you know, the music industry is very much like publishing, and things that you think are so great that should be wildly popular just don't end up landing there. And then things that you think will never take off do. Mm-hmm. So, you know, it's very, you know, I've witnessed firsthand that frustration of, you know, especially to me, like music is just a whole other level to me. You know, the idea of like, it's just, I mean, writing is hard, but I can't even imagine. Like, you need to be born with something to be a musician, I think. So yeah, to see people just pour their heart into something and have it not work out, and I think that's really relatable to a lot of people, because we all have something that we tried that didn't work. So, but yes, I thought a lot about different musicians I've known and worked with who just never made it and should have. You know, people who I still, like, I see them on Facebook and they're doing whatever their job is now, whether it's real estate or financial advising or whatever, and just thinking, you know, they have so much talent inside of them that's just, you know, they did their best. And, you know, I do think it says a lot about what we consider success. Because it is true. It's like, especially I think right now, you know, if you don't have 2 million followers on TikTok and whatever, then you haven't made it. But, you know, there are different degrees of success. And I think Willow really had to grapple with how much of this external validation she needed, and how much could she just enjoy that she had this talent and ability, and that she could express herself with it, and that maybe that was enough. So.
Okay. So a lot of non-romance readers might look at romance and think it's just all, you know, cotton candy fluff or 50 Shades of Grey, right?
Right.
But we do cover a lot of, you know, serious topics and portray characters who are dealing with those topics. And so you've done that here at Read. So what did you find challenging about portraying this man who's dealing with grief and anxiety alongside the humor and the heat that we also find in this book?
Right. That's definitely hard to have a balance, because you want, I mean, I want to write things that are very happy and life affirming and positive, but, you know, that's just not life. You know, things happen. And exploring someone's grief is a way to reveal character that really there is no other thing that reveals character in that way. you know, and yeah, it was hard to balance that sadness with happiness and hope and all of that. But I think that was part of what falling in love does for him, is it gives him hope. You know, Willow kind of opens up his world again, because he was so shut down and sad and processing and all that kind of thing. And I also think when you read the book, you'll see he's pretty grumpy to begin with. So being sad and grumpy is you know, a hard combination. So yeah, I just tried to be mindful of not just wallowing in it, I guess. I think the fact that it's hard because grief, you know, it just comes up when it comes up, and we've all experienced that. So, but I think, you know, he's like 7 months removed from the death of his father at this point. So it's a little less raw, it's a little less fresh, and yeah. So, but yeah, it was a balancing act, and I was very cognizant of it the whole time I was writing, you know, and there were times where it got really hard because you could go to this really dark place, but it didn't really suit the book. So yeah, anyway, it's a balancing act.
And you did a great job.
Thank you.
With that balancing act. So,
thank you very much.
Reed is definitely a tough nut to crack.
Mm-hmm.
He's, you know, kind of walled himself off from the world, and he's in his bubble of, you know, solitary, and he does not appreciate, you know, her coming in and
messing with his world.
Yeah. So it takes a minute for the romance to take off, right? Which in the romance business we call slow burn,
right?
As opposed to an insta love kind of story, right, where the romance is right away.
Right.
Did you find it more challenging to write a slow burn?
No, I wanted to write something that was painful for. Because those are my favorite books. Those are the ones where you're like, just kiss already. Come on, turn the page or whatever. So. No, I really, that was purposely. I wanted to write that book that was, and I do remember when the first kiss happens, you know, Patience, who was my editor at that time, she wrote in the margin, she's like, finally. But I also liked it because they worked out their shit before the romance started, or a lot of it, not all of it, but they worked out a lot of stuff for themselves and as a potential couple before anything happened. I mean, you and I have talked about this a bunch about, you know, some people really like insta love. I do not. That whole I realize that you meet someone and you're like, oh my God, you know, this person, I have to whatever. But it just, I don't know. To me,
I like building up to it.
Yeah, I like building up to it too. And it's very hard to sell, I also think, too. It's like, you know, and readers see right through that. They're just like, I don't buy the romance between these two people.
Yeah.
So,
as a reader and a writer, I love watching the couple kind of build a friendship.
Right.
And then get into a relationship. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's why you and I both like writing second chance romance, because at least there's a foundation there. It is hard to write a romance about two people who've just met each other and don't know each other very well. Because you just, in the back of your mind, you're like, how long is this gonna last? I mean, we've all, you know, been around a friend who's like, oh yeah, I met this guy on vacation and he's the one or whatever. And you're like, you've known him for 10 days. So yeah, you know, you're thinking that. Yeah, while you're reading, of course.
Exactly, that plays in my mind all the time. Yeah. And that is why I love second chance, friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, because you do have some kind of a solid foundation already. So.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about two tropes: insta love and slow burn.
Right.
But this book is solidly, you know, the centerpiece is the grumpy sunshine.
Yes.
Romance trope. So the question is, did you decide you were going to write Grumpy Sunshine, or did you come up with the premise first and it just fit neatly into
Okay, so Reed, the hero, is a former chef, and Steve and I are watching The Bear a lot at that time, or whatever. He's pretty freaking grumpy a lot of the time, and so serious and driven. So I liked the idea of, I just saw him that way. I can't really explain it. You know, there were a few times in edits where people were like, he's kind of mean. I'm like, yeah, he is kind of mean. Like, you know, they're just, sometimes he says things that are mean. He says sorry later. But yeah, I mean, not everybody is just naturally nice or happy, you know, and he is very much someone who sacrificed a lot for his career. In the book, he's basically, you know, he's come home to Connecticut after years of, you know, being, you know, kind of rising star in the culinary world, and he's basically burned out and pushed himself too far. And then he came home to see his dad, only to find out that his dad was sick. And so it is a very, like, heartbreaking part of the story. But I think, you know, again, it's a whole idea of, like, success at any cost. You know, is it really worth it? And again, that was another dynamic I really enjoyed writing, was two creative people who are creative in different mediums, because she doesn't understand what he can do with food and he doesn't really understand what she can do with music, but they see that in each other, that, like, creative element of each other, and it's part of what makes them fall in love with each other as people, not just as, like, I'm hot for you kind of thing. So that was, I don't know if I answered your question. The Grumpy Sunshine. I mean, it was just, and I also just saw Willow as, like, a very upbeat, happy, she's full of energy, she's ready to go, let's go do stuff, let's whatever. She gets into trouble, she, you know, it's just her personality. That's just the way I saw her from the beginning. So
you just kind of came up with the characters and the premise first.
Yeah. It wasn't really until later when I was like, oh, this is Grumpy Sunshine.
Yeah.
I wasn't, like, trying to shoehorn them into that. So.
Yeah, that's usually how I operate too. Like, I usually come up with the premise first and then just, oh, it's this. Or I can turn it up with that.
Right. Interesting. So you come up with the premise first and then, because I usually come up with the characters first, and usually only one of the characters.
I usually will kind of, like, think of the, like, what if this happened, you know, and then I start to think about who the people are.
Right.
But of course, we often write in series. So by then, for the series especially, you already know some of those characters, especially since I do families and friend groups and stuff. So by then, you have a good idea of who that person is and all of that. But yeah, usually it's the premise that I kind of come up, and then I start thinking about the characters.
Right.
Speaking of careers and all of that, this fall will have been a published author for 12 years.
I know, which is crazy.
And so, during the course of 12 years, a few things have happened.
A few things have happened.
And so, do you find that you approach writing a book and developing a story differently at this stage of your career?
Yes. I will say it's kind of, so I've talked about this before. When I wrote my very first book, I had no freaking clue what I was doing. Like, none. And if I could,
a lot of freedom in that.
Well, that's the thing. If I could ever reclaim the magic of being clueless, again, I would, because I wrote with such just, like, whatever was. I didn't think about if I was going to offend someone, or if people were going to like my characters, or, you know, who was going to buy this book. I just wrote. So I think I'm getting a little bit closer to returning to that. I mean, you know, you're going to care, but it is hard when you feel like you're writing and like the world is sitting on your shoulder. But, you know, there's a lot of, you know, things you need to be sensitive to when you're writing a romance, you know. When 12 years ago, we weren't talking about consent. You know, we weren't talking about how that needs to be explicit in the book, that everybody is on board and we're enthusiastic about it. 12 years ago, romance was even whiter than it is now. Or what it was whiter than it is now, but it's still very white. And so yeah, just the diversity question, the, you know, straightness of romance. I mean, there's just a lot of things you need to think about when you're writing. And so I am it's changed a lot. I do feel like it's opened up a lot. There's a lot, just, a wider range of romance being published, which is great, but, there's still a million miles to go. And every year there's something that becomes wildly popular that I'm mad about. I mean,
monster romance.
Right, monster romance. I don't want to offend anyone here who reads monster romance, but now I know. I don't get it at all. But,
That is huge.
Right.
And I literally saw there's a romance, I swear to you, that it's about her in a door. I swear.
Oh, is it a Chuck Tingle book?
No.
Okay.
It's a real book. It's a real romance. Yeah, and it's like popular.
A door?
A door.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
Because y'all would have thought I made that up. Thank you.
Yeah. It's a Chuck Tingle book.
Wow.
No, it's not. So,
Right.
Yeah, so it's like, just like you said, just you never know what's
Right.
going to pop up.
And for everyone here who doesn't know about Chuck Tingle, he's written romances about, like, a guy in a bicycle seat. I mean, seriously. He writes these crazy out there books about, like, inanimate objects, and anyway, but people buy them. People love them. That's not my thing. I like real people. But, so yeah, I mean, things have changed a lot. The thing that's weird to me is when someone will bring up a book that I loved by an author who just disappeared. And that's been happening, I feel like, a lot more lately.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah. Where you've like, oh, I totally forgot about that person and how they were like the flavor of the month, and then all of a sudden they just, but it's hard. It kind of chews you up and wants to spit you out. And we've both been through it with publishers and all of that. It's hard when you try to make money off of something creative. It's always going to get, whether it's music or art or books, something in that equation isn't totally right. But of course, we want creative people to be able to make money. So it should happen, but it doesn't always work the way it should. Yeah. Right.
And the industry has shrunk quite a bit. Publishers disappearing and
right, and more corporate consolidation, and companies getting folded into each other. And then the other thing I don't like right now is just the influence that retailers, the big retailers, have. Reese and I both wrote for Desire, and Walmart basically killed our line. They had enough power to say, they just kept putting it in fewer and fewer stores until there was just no more money to be made. And when you put all your eggs in that basket, I'm sorry, but Walmart is, they're definitely skewing toward super religious romance and very white romance, definitely keeping things as straight as humanly possible. And so I definitely don't like that. But, the market will figure itself out, hopefully.
And speaking of the market, and changes in it, one of the huge things we've seen in recent years is the impact of TikTok on marketing and sales, which is referred to as book talk.
Right.
And book talk can overnight make a book or an author, and it can be hard to get traction on TikTok. So as a romance author in the age of TikTok, what do you find? What are some of the challenges that you find?
Well, I suck at TikTok. I'm terrible at it. Half the time I don't really even consume TikTok. Like, I go on there, but I'm just like, I don't know. The algorithm doesn't like me, or like even just as a consumer of it, I never find what I like, and so I don't know. To me, it's like winning the lottery. Like if you end up becoming world famous because of book talk, then good for you. But you look at the authors who really benefited from it. They didn't have active presences on TikTok. Colleen Hoover wasn't on TikTok every day pushing her books. Colleen Hoover was busy being Colleen Hoover, and then a bunch of book talkers started talking about her books, and those were books that were like 6 years old, 8 years old. I mean, so, in some ways that's kind of cool. That something that is not, front list and, current release could take off. But the thing I don't like is that, you and I heard this a million times. So Colleen Hoover blows up on Book Talk. There's whole Colleen Hoover end caps and Target and Walmart and Barnes and Noble.
I actually saw fingernails, like
Colleen Hoover
fingernails. Yeah, they go with the books.
Okay, good.
In Target the other day.
Right. So you get that, and then in every single meeting you have with your publisher or your editor, it's, can you be like Colleen Hoover? Wow. It's like, okay, well, Colleen Hoover is Colleen Hoover, and so
that part,
right?
That's the part that irritates.
Yeah, no, it's super irritating. And the other thing is just, it's like a lot of industries, they all want to chase trends.
Yes.
So, but chasing things just does not work. Like I said, Colleen Hoover wasn't chasing anything other than just writing more books when she took off. I think
especially in a slow-moving industry like publishing. In indie, it's a whole different story because you can do stuff like that. I got this idea; it can be in somebody's hands in 2 months or a month. Right. But with a slow-moving industry like the publishing industry,
is not on the traditional side. Mm. But then you look at like Lucy Score, who is indie. Again, she was someone who was not, actively on TikTok, I don't think. She was someone who really focused on like her newsletter and, she had a lot of fans. And then, so I think she had this really good base, and then TikTok helped launch her into a whole other stratosphere. But, I don't, I don't want to sound like sour grapes. I don't love it when it's like, so then like I said, you go to Walmart and it's a whole end cap of one author. It's like, okay, well, that's great that you can sell all of that, but it's such like a of the moment opportunity. It's not about developing other authors or looking at, why was this successful? How can we replicate that success? Instead they tend to focus on how can we replicate the content, but that's just not, I don't think readers want the same thing kind of spewed back at them. They don't want to read, a book that's like Colleen Hoover. They want to, all those books, it's not about the story, it's all about how you felt when you read it. Mm. And so that's a really hard thing to replicate and reproduce.
Right.
Either it resonates with people or it doesn't.
Agreed.
So, yeah.
And that, what you just said, reminded me of, I remember a long time ago in like a workshop or something, Rhonda Helmsworth had said, for instance, she was talking about like when there's a trend, for instance, like we just talked about the trend that we're not, into, know, if you love it, that's great. But, we're not into much romance or whatever. But she was using the stepbrother one. Mm-hmm. So that was really hot at the time.
Yeah, stepbrothers were a big deal for a while.
So she talked about like, hey, if you're not a person who wants to write a stepbrother romance, I am not.
Right.
She's like, think of what it is that people are enjoying about that. What is it that they like about it? In that case, it's the taboo.
Yeah.
How can you use that to write a story? Right. So I try to look at things like that as opposed to saying, I'm going to try to write a book just like that person. So.
Right. Yeah,
but then it goes back to the whole Willow thing,
right?
About being talented and not necessarily
right.
So it's one of those things where you just keep at it. I look to at some of the people you mentioned. You mentioned Lucy Score. You mentioned Colleen Hoover, and I would throw in Kennedy Ryan.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Those three women.
Although I kind of felt like Kennedy from the very beginning, there was this whole like rising star vibe.
Well, see, I feel like, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like she might have done like. Books with somebody else first, and then she started doing indie. But my point was, all three of them kicked ass as indie authors. Yep. They did their thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
Just kept going.
Yep.
And they built themselves up as indie authors. That made the publishing industry take note. Yep. Then they said, "Hey, they're selling a lot of books on their own.
Right.
Imagine what they could do with our distribution."
Right.
And now, like, even like Kennedy, like all the books she published back as an indie. there are research. Those books have been in KU for like a decade.
Right.
And
Now they're in
like,
Costco.
yes. Now they're in
Yeah.
Costco, right?
Yeah.
Because they saw that there was a market for it. They saw how amazingly talented she was. But I love that she just kept her head down and kept going. So that is the message that I keep telling myself. Just keep swimming, Dory.
Just keep swimming. That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Well, it's just you just never know what's going to happen.
Right.
So, and I think part of it too is just like challenging yourself to, I think we all kind of pigeonhole ourselves, like this is my lane, this is, what I do, but I think you have to be willing to think outside of that sometimes and take chances. I mean, it's hard. It's hard. You can't feel like daring and bold every day. I'm brave today. I'm gonna be brave tomorrow and brave the next day. Like some days I'm just too tired to be brave. Sometimes I just want to like do like the bare minimum of showing up and doing my work. Yep.
But one thing I do love is like when a reader does discover you, is that a lot of times they will just eat up that backlist. So,
right.
So that is nice to know because you have 44 books, right?
Right.
So when someone discovers you now, they have 43 other books to read.
Right, exactly. Get to it, people.
I love it. So, last two questions because the answer to this might not be the same.
Okay.
But what are you working on now?
Okay.
And what can we expect from you next?
Okay. They are the same thing, I think.
Okay.
I don't know. So, yes, I'm writing for this new Harlequin imprint, Afterglow, and I'm really excited about the possibilities, mostly because I get to write more of what I want to write. I had all this upheaval in my writing life in November, December. My longtime editor at Harlequin left with no warning. Seriously, I felt like someone had died. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I mean, Patience, she brought me into Harlequin. She was the whole reason I was there, and she just understood me on a level that I couldn't imagine going forward without her. So anyway, and then shortly after that, I fired my agent. So anyway, it just felt like time for a change. So I'm excited about Afterglow and the things they're trying to do. Their whole point was that, so that trade paperback size and the kind of more fun contemporary romances, they're just, a lot of those books are like $15.99 to $17.99 price point, which for a lot of younger readers, and actually a lot of readers, period, especially if you read a lot, that's not cheap. And the books that we used to write were like $5.99 or $5.25 at Walmart. So they're trying to offer them at a lower price point, which I think is a smart idea. So anyway, so when I met with my new editor, who Stacy Boyd, this was in January or whatever, I asked her, what are you looking for? What do you want? And because I always ask that question, it's just easier. Just tell me what you want, because then I can see if I can figure that out. Anyway, and so she told me like two things that didn't appeal to me at all, and then she said, "I'm really looking for someone to write a Formula One romance." And my brain basically exploded because during COVID, my daughter and I just got way into Drive to Survive, and we were watching Formula One all the time. And that is like, she and I text about Formula One like multiple times a day, every day. We're sharing reels on Instagram, and we follow the sport really closely. We have Formula One brunch at our house today. I mean, it's like hardcore. So yes, so I'm writing 2 Formula One romances. Stacy was very excited about it. The first book doesn't have a title yet. It has a tentative title, but I don't know if they're going to keep it. The tentative title is Not So Fast. It's about a podcaster, and she goes viral for her criticism of the hero and his driving. She says on a podcast episode that he was driving like he had his dick in his hand. So anyway, that's like a joke that runs through the whole book. But anyway, so and she's very like super smart, she's someone who's been kind of aimless. She has multiple advanced degrees. She, gets curious about something and dives into it or whatever. And so the same thing with podcasting. And she's been a fan of the sport for a long time. Anyway, so she gets sucked into this world of like kind of like influencers and all this kind of stuff, and she isn't really sure, because this is a world that is very much built on like money and beautiful people and people with a lot of influence and all that kind of stuff, and she doesn't really feel like she belongs in it. So yeah, it's been super fun to write. The hero is British, and he's also like comes from more humble beginnings. There are a few drivers who don't come from like money and affluence and all that kind of stuff, and I think a lot of them feel sort of on the outs too. But anyway, so that'll be the next book, and then when I turn that book in, I have to finish writing the book that's the companion to this.
That's what I was going to ask about. So you haven't written that one yet?
No, I have not.
Okay.
So I was like,
she jumped right over that one to the Formula.
Well, because unfortunately that was what Harlequin wanted.
Okay.
They wanted the Formula One book right away.
Got it. Okay. Got it.
And unfortunately, when they offer to write you a check, you say okay. So the Bailey's book is like 2/3 to 3/4 of the way written. So I'm going to finish that as soon as humanly possible.
Bailey is the best friend that changes places with.
Right. And then the hero in that book is Willow's brother. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is pretty obvious after you read this book. Yeah. So those will be the next two things. And then there is a second Formula One book, and I don't know what that's going to be about. But I'll figure that out. I think I'm going to write a gamer. Like she's a gamer, and that because a lot of the drivers are gamers, and so
I like that.
Yeah, I'm just trying to write heroines that aren't, I don't know. I wasn't really that into writing like, oh, she's the publicist for the team or whatever. Whatever. I love a good. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So that's what's next for me, and then after that, I don't know.
Okay, that's a lot. I love it.
I'm not very good at like looking. I mean, I'm like you, I always have a lot of different things going, but I never really feel like I know more than like 1 or 2 projects ahead.
It's a lot to have going on, and especially with the writing. Like, okay, so I said I wasn't going to ask you any more questions, but I mean, do you find it difficult to work on more than one project at once? Because I know, I've done it, and sometimes I don't have a choice to like writing one book and then stopping editing another, but I find it I prefer to just focus on one and then move on to the next.
Yeah, I prefer to focus on one too. But I have done it. They can't be at the same stage. Like you can't be just starting one book and then starting a second book. I just don't think there's any way you can, because it's just like different parts of your brain that you're using. And so I can be like starting one book and finishing another or editing another. But I don't like it. No, it's not fun. It's too confusing. I'm getting,
because it's a world, like you create a world and you get lost in that world, and it's like now it's like, there's this world, or Lord of the Rings or whatever, and then Barbie. I mean, it's not the same, right?
Right, exactly.
So that can be really hard. So.
Yeah, now the only thing I found was that to delineate my day, like I'll do this before lunch and then this one after. So like Barbie before, maybe Barbie after lunch, and Lord of the Rings before lunch.
Yeah, that's a good move.
Right, like whatever is lighter and fluffier and easier, do that in the afternoon. But yeah, no, it's not fun. But yeah, sometimes you have to do that. I mean, part of it is just romance, because readers read so much. I only have 1 book out this year, which is just like...
That's wild for us.
Yeah, I mean, Reese and I both had years where we had like 5 books out in 1 year.
7 1 year, yeah.
Yeah, wow. That's ridiculous.
It is. Wow.
That is absurd that you did that. Congratulations.
We did. We did that because those books were kick-ass.
No, I know. They were.
You know what I'm saying?
They were.
To have that many books come out in 1 year. I mean, of course, we didn't write them all necessarily in 1 year, but to have that many books come out. And then that's a whole job, because it's like writing, and then there's the marketing piece. And so there's just so many things.
Yeah. And your publisher does way less for you than you think they will. So, in general.
So that's enough of me. That's enough of me hogging up Karen. Does anybody else have a question for her? Okay.
Actually, at the very end,
You got okay.
Talking about like the marketing and the industry part of it, like how much time does that take y'all to do that, and how much did it used to be mostly done by publishing houses, and now that is, since it's all social media stuff, you know, what is that?
I mean, I think it was different because there were just fewer authors. I mean, there's so many authors now. But, so I think if you were with a publisher, 20 years ago, they probably were doing a fair amount, but then there was also no social media. There's just so much more, there's just so much noise, there's so much harder to break through. So yeah, you have to, I mean, I'm like basically a part-time graphic designer. Like, I'm in Canva, like making all the graphics and coming up with taglines that are better than what the publisher came up with. And, sometimes they do ads, and you get your friends to put your book in their newsletter and do your own newsletter, and it's a lot.
It's a huge piece of it. And as a matter of fact, I was just talking to an author friend the other day, and she's been an indie author her entire career, and she had her first like traditional book, and so she's kind of like, she's been spending a lot of money traveling her own money traveling the country and visiting different places and stuff. So she sat me down and she's like, is it just me, or does the publisher not, what are they doing to sell a book? And I'm like, if you are not that top name at an imprint,
right,
you'll be doing a lot of that stuff on your own, So, and even one of the things I've discovered is that sometimes I'll look at an author and I'm like, oh, she's everywhere. I'm like, oh, that's great. They're really supporting her. And then I'll find out that author spent thousands of dollars of their own money to invest in PR.
Right.
So that's why they're all over, so that's just part of the thing, whether you're indie or with a company or a traditional publisher, you're going to be spending a lot of money and time on marketing. That's just a part of it. And I am a person, when I was a kid selling candy, I would rather eat that box of candy and buy it myself than to sell it, because I just hated the whole process. So I do not enjoy that. So, but I've had to learn social media and marketing and all that. So
I mean, I don't like it either. I don't like talking about myself. I like talking about my books, but I don't like doing it all the time. I had to learn I learned the most from my friends who are British. Because they're just like unapologetically, like they will just, promote themselves like crazy. I don't know what it is, like culturally, but so you have to be like a broken record, because there's no way to know who's listening, who's paying attention. It's frustrating, but it just keeps swimming, right?
Yes. And that graphic struggle is real, because every time I look up, I'm like, more graphics.
I know.
Because even if you make a bunch of them, at some point they're stale, right? And you gotta start creating new ones. And so, going back to when we talked about TikTok, I do consume TikTok a lot, to the point that I spend $100 a year on a app that will shut me out of social media because I can get lost in it, and I have ADHD. I'm going to tell you that right now. So,
is it the Freedom app, or is there something different?
It's not
now?
Freedom.
Okay.
So Freedom,
because Freedom is an old school one.
Yeah, and you can use that on a computer. I use the Opal. It's called Opal, so it's like $100 a year.
Okay.
But I can, decide. Okay, these apps shut me out. So I have it from 9 to 5, from 9 to 5 Monday through Friday. It shuts me out of social media. And then I also have it shut me out at 10:30 at night, between 10:30 and 6 a.m. So I won't be doing that revenge scrolling all night. That's when TikTok and IG Reels would get me.
Right.
So I do consume them, but I hate doing the work of putting together the whatever. And then when you put something together and you're like, this is freaking brilliant, and then there's like 2 views. So it's like it's a challenge. You just never know what's gonna work and what's not. And then, so that's a whole nother piece. Is I'm constantly like learning. Like I'm in this TikTok marketing program, but I'm in this self-publishing.
Ads class.
So there's a lot ads classes, right?
So much learning to do.
There's so many pieces.
And it's always changing too.
And that's the thing.
You should not be looking at your phone at night, though. The blue light is bad for your brain.
I am not paid by Opal, but they should pay me, because I have been telling everybody that about it. Yeah, it is bad.
No, I'm serious. Like I stopped reading on my iPad at night. I only read paper now, and I sleep so much better.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, because the temptation to just hop on YouTube for 15 minutes is like
And
too.
that's what I always say to myself.
Yeah.
Well,
Either
just check your IG and see if there's anybody you need to respond to.
Right,
You know?
right.
Yeah. 2 hours later.
Yeah, either that or I had to just buy like a regular Kindle
Yeah.
or something. So, anyway.
So I'm sorry I don't have better news about that, Marky.
Thank you, that was interesting.
Okay.
It's like a second full job.
Yeah,
Yes.
kind of. Yeah.
It's a huge piece of it. You cannot ignore that. So.
Right.
And I have an assistant, and I still have to do a large part of the marketing. So
Right. No, I have somebody too, and the person I had hired before, and then it didn't work out, and then I rehired her. She's doing better this time, but yeah, it's hard to find somebody who's,
it is.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions? Yes.
What would you say is your favorite romance book trope?
I like enemies to lovers only because I like all the fighting. I like fighting, arguing. I like reading that. I like writing it, and I just think it's all the conflict is at the beginning. So.
Yeah, but do you like it better in romance or fantasy romance?
I don't read that much fantasy romance. So do you read a lot of fantasy romance?
Yeah, I read like one that's really good is the Core of Thorns and Roses series.
Yeah,
they do a really good job with that.
Yeah.
Is that the one you would recommend to start with?
Yes.
Her? Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I started with.
Yeah, I haven't read that book. I need to read that book because I see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And I have been seeing it everywhere for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah, which you always know is a good
Yes.
sign.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't have a single favorite trope. I have a top 5. So always the top 5.
Okay, so what's the top 5?
So the top 5 is enemies to lovers, friends to lovers, second chance romance, forced proximity, and best friends, younger sibling.
Oh,
That's my top 5. So.
nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Those are all good.
Yeah,
Those are all
yeah.
good.
And whenever I can write a story and like mash them up, because I don't know, I've got to the point where I don't want just one trope in the book. I gotta have like 2 or 3.
Right,
It's
right.
gotta be organic.
Right.
Can't feel like forced or whatever.
Right.
But yeah,
I like the
it
weird.
heightens the stakes. and
I
makes
like
it
the
more fun.
weird tropes where that aren't really tropes, but like she has a cat who doesn't like anybody, and then he comes over, and the cat really likes him a lot. I like that
That's a
trope.
weirdly specific trope.
I also like the one where one of them doesn't sleep well, and then once they start doing it, then that person is able to sleep.
Very weirdly specific again. I feel like you have some of these books in your catalog.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
Okay, so what's the cat book?
Oh, the cat book. Actually, I did a free online read for Harlequin called Better Luck Next Door, which was about, it's actually kind of a prequel to Slop and Smell the Roses, because it's set in Willow's apartment building in Brooklyn. It's about a woman who writes for an online magazine. She basically edits like an Am I the Asshole column. It's not called that. I had to call it something different to make it a little more family friendly. And the hero ghosted her. And then he moves into her apartment building next door. So, but anyway, she has 2 cats, and her cats don't really like anybody, but her cats love him. So,
And the sleep one?
the sleep one, that isn't one of the first books I wrote. Is this book called Rockstarred, and the heroine is very just like uptight or whatever, and he unwinds her.
Love it. Okay. Any other questions? Yes.
I was going to ask, how much research do you do? Like, if you're writing about a chef, do you need to go and learn everything you can about what the chef does? If you want to set a book in a certain area, do you go there to visit it, or do you just look at YouTube? We hadn't always been there.
I'm very thankful for the internet for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Because I think about that all the time. Like when I have to look up one little fact, and I was like, before I would have had to get in my car and go to the library to look this up.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a lot of research, and if you're Reese, there's even like 10 times more research because she's very like total stickler for I just remember she and I worked on a series together, and she sends me this email. She's like, what shade of lipstick does the heroine wear, and what's her signature cocktail? I was like, I don't know. But she has to know all these little things about
and to be fair, we were working on oh gosh, why can I not
Secrets of the A-List?
No, but what are they called? What do we call the cowboy?
Oh, Texas Cattlemen's Club?
Yeah, but what is the term for those types of books where it's the I can't. That's the word. See, you can't think of it anyway.
I can't think
Basically,
of it either.
the publisher comes up with this idea, or whatever, and so they'll say, "We're gonna have this idea."
Continuity.
That's it. Thank you. Continuity. And so they'll say, "We have these 6 books, and they're gonna be about these people or whatever." So then they'll get six authors, and so it's really where these 5 things have to happen in the book. And so even though these things have been predetermined by the publisher, if 5 different people write the books, it's going to be 5 different books because you have a lot of leeway in terms of personality and things that happen and stuff. So the books are connected, and I love, whether it's my books or in a continuity like that, as much as possible, incorporating the other characters and stuff. And so I'm always wanting to incorporate their people. And so if I'm saying something like she's drinking a drink, I don't want her to be drinking a drink, and it's something that she said in her book that she would never drink. So so I will ask bizarre questions like, does she have a chauffeur?
Right.
She doesn't? I'm going to give her one. Here's the chauffeur's name. So I will definitely do that. And then I'm very visual about things. So if I'm writing a scene about a Vegas hotel, I'll have to look at the Vegas hotel so I can kind of orient myself. Mm-hmm. This is where this is in the room. This is where that is in the room. So I do a lot of research. And so sometimes I will give a character, like right now I'm writing a series, the Love and Music series about alumni of a school of artists that's set in Atlanta. And so now I gotta learn all this stuff about being in the studio and the musicians, and then what's the name of this board, what's the name of this room, the live room versus the studio, that kind of thing. So sometimes I do give a person a career. I'm like, oh, this sounds so cool, until I gotta start doing all this research, and then I gotta figure out, who these people are and how to do this. And
I mean,
you do all that research, and maybe a line out of all that research will actually go into the book. Right. Knowing it makes it more authentic. Though.
Yep. And I've sometimes consulted with people who know about things. So in one of my books, the heroine, it's like a love triangle, but the heroine's husband has left her at the beginning of the book. And he has this muscle car in the garage that is his baby, and she sells it. So I had to reach out to a friend who knows a lot about muscle cars. What would be a really cool car that a guy would be really pissed about if his who he ran out on sells, things like that. Or actually, I wrote in one of my books, the hero who's a musician is building a studio. So I had to talk to a friend of mine who has built a studio. How does it work? How he walked me through the whole thing. So yeah. But there's a lot, and that's why I tend to write books about places I've been. I don't tend to write books about places I haven't been, because
places you need to write places you want to go.
Really
have to go to France, because this one's going to be set in Paris.
That's right.
But thank God for YouTube.
Yes.
And nothing is better to me when I write a story, I wrote Candidly Yours, and they were going to all these different festivals in the Caribbean, and for people to say, hey, the way you wrote this, it felt like I was there, or I've been there before, and you really got it. That I love that so much. So yeah. But thank goodness YouTube.
Yes, I know. Seriously, no. I've done things like, what does the drive from this town to this town look like?
Yep.
Pretty regularly, you can find some guy somewhere made a video of the drive from this town to this town. Wow. So you can at least, accurately describe it.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I had to do that a lot too when we wrote that Asheville series.
Yep.
Because there's a scene where they go hiking at the top of this cliff and stuff, and so I had to look for videos on YouTube where you could see, what it's like, and can you slip and fall off the edge, and just, all these kind of things. So yeah, it's fun, but it also can be a hole that you fall down.
Yeah.
So I have to sometimes because I can't do one of the things they tell you sometimes, don't get lost in research, just put X's right there and then you can go back to it. Yeah, I'm not gonna do that. So I get lost.
Yeah. Well, and then you start researching and you're like, this isn't really what I thought this was. Now I have to look for a substitute for whatever.
Yeah.
So,
But that was a great question. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Mine's not specific to the book, but I'm just curious about the process and how you sort of structure your writing time. Like, do you write when stuff hits you, or do you have sort of a routine that you follow regularly, sort of day to day?
So I am the most productive when I get up in the morning, like really early before Steve gets up, and it's just me and the cat and some coffee. And I can get more done between like 5:30 and 7 than I get done the whole rest of the day. So I try to write as fast as humanly possible during that time, because then I can spend the rest of the day doing all the other stuff I have to do, but then also revising what I've written. And if I have a start, then at least kind of like my brain is in the story. So then if I'm like go for a walk or doing the dishes or whatever, I'm still thinking about it.
And then so at the end of that day, you know where you're going to start up again the next day?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's weird. A lot of times I get ideas right before I go to bed.
Right.
So I have like a whole stack of notebooks on the bedside table. Steve knows this. And I just write down ideas of like where I'm going to start the next day. That seems to work too. But for a long time I kept spending all this time like trying to figure out how do I be more efficient? And I just realized these things I know work. So I should just do these things.
A list of things that work for me,
right?
That I to remind myself of what works. Yeah. And another thing I would say is because especially like we wrote category romance and stuff, which the readers are voracious, and we had like a lot of books contracted. Like at one point, I had 8 books contracted at one time between the 2 publishers, and so like you don't have the luxury of saying I'm gonna wait till I'm inspired. You know, we are working writers,
right?
And so we've got to figure it out.
Right.
You got to figure it out and write something. So, so that's one of the things I learned really quickly. So I do have a list of things that work for me, and one of those is I work better early in the morning.
Yep.
I also work better. For me personally, I work with other authors over Zoom, so we have like accountability sessions where we work together and write and stuff like that. So
that also helps. I also I make a point of just trying to get inspiration from everywhere, because then it's kind of like you're, whether I'm watching TV or listening to a podcast or whatever, because people are always talking about their stories or whatever, and there's always some little tidbit to take away from it. So
I feel like
to
most
steal
of us have no shortage of stories. It's like I have a file of stories. I don't have time to write them all.
Right.
So I feel like we come up with the stories. It's just A, do we have time for it, and B, are you gonna be able to sell it?
Right.
So
yes,
that is the reality.
Yes, that is the reality of it.
Yes. Giving hard truths out here about the publishing industry. All right, that was
Scared
a great
straight.
question. Thank you so much. Yes, scared straight. Any other questions?
Yes. I'm curious about the stopping when you're writing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you stop at the end of the scene? Do you stop because somebody else got up and now it's time to go make the coffee, or drink the coffee?
Was it I think Ernest Hemingway used to always do this thing where he would like stop in the middle of a sentence. I definitely try to leave myself some breadcrumbs. So, but yeah, it really does just depend on like, I need to, I have a dentist appointment or whatever, or I, need to go grocery shopping at some point. But yeah, definitely, I try to not, the only time I'm going to quit is right when I write the end. Then I might quit. But otherwise, I don't, I try not to finish a chapter and then say, okay, I'm done. Because otherwise, then just starting the next time is so hard. So you have to leave yourself a little bit of something to start with. How about you?
It's a million reasons why I might stop, is I might have got sidetracked on social media. I might have been watching YouTube. My husband came home and he asked me a question, or our kid called, so it just could be a million reasons why I stopped. It is helpful. I think when I first started, I thought that I was a pantser, which means that basically you don't use an outline, you just kind of write by the seat of your pants. So that's the term we use, pantser. but especially in the beginning, I kept starting novels but not finishing them.
Mhm.
And so then I learned, okay, well, maybe I should try just outlining the scene I'm stuck in. And so that allowed me to finish it, and then I finished the chapter, and then eventually I finished the book. So with this thing with finishing, like, it's helpful definitely to, when I'm starting, to have some idea of what I'm gonna write. So I might not necessarily stop in the middle, like that, I might say whatever, but I do usually have some kind of idea. And so one of the things I do is, like, a lot of times before I actually start writing the book starts to talk, and the characters are starting to talk to me. Hey babe, how you doing? I just saw you. And so one of the things that I will do is I will start to make just little notes, or even text myself, because like you said, at night in the bed is when you always have these ideas or stuff like that. So I'll write myself a note, and so I'll have these little things, or I know there's this conversation with her and her mom, or him and his brother, or whatever. And so then that allows me to go to that. So I also don't always write in order consecutively.
Yeah.
So a lot of times if I'm stuck here and I don't know what to do next, then I know that this other scene has to happen, and I know what happens there, and so I'll start writing that. So yeah, just a lot of moving around. So.
Yep.
Any other questions? Thank you for that question. That was a great question. Also, I'm mad impressed that you can do two things at one time. So yes, I have given up the whole multitasking ghost.
Just keep my hands busy.
Yeah. Any other questions? Y'all have asked some great questions, and I think we're over the time anyway.
All right. Okay.
She didn't even flag me, so thank you. So great questions. Thank you so much, and thank you all for coming. And if you haven't picked up Swap and Smell the Roses, absolutely make sure you read Willow and Freeze. And I love the little town and the folks in it. So yeah, so you're gonna enjoy it. So make sure you grab your copy.
Thank you.